Yes. Cool. So the agenda for today. So first of all, we have some games to review and some knowledge to share. Two of the games are more regarding the openings. Um, and we have a third game, which is also something about opening, but also more about like middle game and positional analysis. And after that, if we have like a little time extra, we can like, yeah, analyze some positions and learning something about knight maneuver or maneuvering the knight. Cool, so that's the plan. Let's get started. So, as I said, the first two games is about opening, and we can walk through this like Italian opening. I think some of you play this one. And so, yeah, we can quickly walk through the first couple moves because they are like book moves, and I think we have talked about that a couple of times. So knight d5 and black play d5 to attack the center, and black has a knight, the center, and this is an isolated center pawn. So white castle, black castle, and rook e1. So basically follow the principles like controlling the open file. Then I have a question. So in this position, if you play as black, let's switch the board. If we play as black, so what shall we do? There might be more than one answers. If this like opening is new to you, that's fine. Just taking it as exercise to consider, like thinking about this position. Our opponent has a center pawn. It's isolated pawn. How can we deal with an isolated center pawn? So that is a question. What shall we do? Clara, what do you think? Since this is the game you play, right? And if you play black and you play bishop g4. hmm Do you want to share something like, or what's your like reasoning of bishop
Uh,
g4?
uh, uh, sort of uh, taking the pawn, and I wanted to taking the d4 pawn.
You want to attack the d4 pawn? Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Because we want to pin the knight. We want to pin the knight and then we can attack the d4. That's a good idea. And this is one of the three top moves from the engine. So bishop g4 is definitely a decent move. So one thing I would like to remind all of you is when your opponent have this isolated center pawn, a very important thing. We have a bunch of important things, but one of the most important is strengthening this control of the square in front of it. So we have a knight like controlling d5. So one of the moves I would recommend is move this knight to e7 and push the c pawn to c6. So with this structure, you will have very good like control of d5, and these two knights are connected. They are super strong at the center. Jaden, your hand is raising. What do you think?
Well, I think there's usually like semi open files or open files. So maybe I'll develop the bishop and then play rook on f to e8.
I mean, after moving the bishop and move the rook. Well, for example, rook to bishop to e6, for example.
And then we can challenge the rook to the open file.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, if we want to move the rook to e8, maybe I don't know, because now the knight is protected by the queen. So if we move it immediately, we will lose material. After the trade, the knight will become honey. So maybe we can move the knight bishop to e6 first, support the knight, and also kind of like um, make the knight safe, and then move the rook to e8. Because if you move the bishop, for example, f5, rook e8, we will lose material, right? the d5 knight, the queen will be overloading basically. So yeah, controlling the open file is definitely the right choice. But the thing is, we need to maybe support the knight first. And knight b6 is another move suggested by the engine. I think it's still like straightforward. We want to trade the knight with the light square bishop because this bishop is so active, and we can open this semi-open file, attacking this pawn. This is another way to attack the pawn. And maybe we can move the bishop to g4 later. So bishop to g4, white kick our bishop. We move it to h5 and the queen to b3. So yeah, so this is the position I like to highlight. So now we have two pieces under attack, the knight and the b7. So what can we do? How can we treat? Sorry, I missed some message from Blake. You said bishop e6. Are you talking about the previous position, like this one, bishop e6?
Yeah.
Okay. Develop bishop and support the knight. Cool. Thank you. Yes. So in this position, what can we do? I got a message from Clara. Knight a5. So this is how we can protect the b7 and attack the queen. And then we can trade the knight with the bishop. Is that what you want to say, Clara? Knight a5. Jaden, your hand is up.
Knight, I think maybe knight to b6.
Knight to b6.
Attacking the bishop.
We can attack the bishop. Or maybe after knight b6, then knight a5. Hopefully we can. Yeah, that's interesting because if we trade the bishop with the knight, this d2 knight moves to f3, then knight a5. Maybe we can win the bishop. Yeah, this looks also interesting. But moving the knight, I think either of these two moves are correct. So, and this is a way we can also keep the pawn safe. If we move the knight to e7 at this point, it's a little bit late because, first of all, if the rook moves to e5, our bishop and the knight will be double attacked. How can we deal with this attack? Are we going to lose material? How can we solve this one? So this is a problem we came across in your game, right, Clara? If I were ask you to like have another chance to play, what would you play, Clara? You're muted if you want to share something.
Knight f6, or what I did play.
Yeah, then we might lose this b7 pawn. Yeah, knight f6, I think we can protect the bishop for sure, and also make the knight safe. But we might end up losing this pawn. Is there any other way to keep these two pieces safe and potentially the b7 as well? Jack, what do you think? If you play as black, these two pieces are on attack.
I'm not sure. I think maybe the only way to try not lose material might be bishop captures f3.
Trade first, and then move the knight.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to b6 and to keep this pawn safe. Yeah. Cool, thank you, Jack. And yeah, Blake also said like bishop f3 and knight b6. Yeah, this position involves so many ways to trade pieces. And we need to find the best one to keep our material safe. Jada, what do you say? You're muted, Jada, but your hand is up.
In this position, could you have maybe played knight to? Oh yeah, you can't play knight to F. Can't play knight to F4. That's a blunder. I think no, it isn't.
Yeah, what's the
Because
problem with knight F4?
can I just play a G3, but then you can just take it, maybe?
Now the knight is protect the bishop. If we play G3,
I'll just take
and
the pawn and H3.
and what about king to H2
Um,
or king to G2? Or maybe can black just take the knight first and then take the pawn? Maybe the bishop can escape from the attacking. If knight move to F4, can white win material? That is a question to everyone. Knight tries to protect the bishop. The structure looks concerning because we have a knight protect the bishop, and the knight is, yeah, at the fourth rank. Jack said queen e3. Is that double attack? So many pieces are on the attack. Then what about the e7 knight to g6? The knight protect the knight and attack the rook. Can white win material? I have a feeling that there is some tactical opportunity. What do you think, everyone? Clara, what do you think? Is knight to f4 safe?
I don't really know. For some reason, I don't know. Because if they play G3, when the analyzers, knight takes H3 is the best move.
So what is the best move?
Well, the thing I saw was knight takes H3.
Knight takes H3, okay, check the king. And if the king moves to H2, for example?
You can just take the F pawn, but you lose a bishop. But like, there's like a reason, and then I forgot what was. And I was like, oh, because I forgot what was the reason.
Okay, so yeah, let's analyze a bit. So G3. I was also talking about like take the knight first with the bishop. Maybe you can try that later. But if we take the pawn, and what about king to G2? The king can actually protect the knight, or maybe bishop to G4, and the knight is protected.
Oh yeah, I think that's the reason why.
Yeah, but king to H2, can't we still play bishop to G4?
Yeah.
I think the knight is not okay at this H3 square. For example, if bishop to F1, then I can move to F2. Then what about queen E2? And then this is a real like double attacking, and also this knight is trapped. So yeah, what I think the problem with knight F2, and the knight could go to G4. Yeah, I mean maybe this is the best scenario black can get after G3. So losing a bishop and winning 2 pawns. And I think white is better because of material. So yeah, so I think G3 can at least kick the knight and black will lose his bishop. Jaden, do you want to say something?
Oh wait. Uh, I've forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think this is a very typical like thing in Italian opening where we have this open file and open diagonals. So many open files or semi-open file and like open diagonals. And there's so many pieces well developed for both sides. And in this position, um, we need to be like very cautious of potential tactical moves like this one because basically I cannot say all the pieces, but most of the pieces are super active on the board. Okay, but I do agree with some of you said to make things easier after rook e5, we move knight to f4 to protect the bishop, which makes the knight passive at h4, f4. So to make things easier, maybe just trade the bishop with the knight and the bishop to rook the knight to c6 and later knight to b6 and later c6 to like have a strong control at the center. That sounds good. Okay, so this is Italian opening and some recap of this position. Any question or thought? And in this game, like we play g3. What did you play after g3, Clara? Do you remember? You played knight to c6 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like we trade the rook with two knights. So
That time I couldn't calculate much because I didn't know if I had the same amount of points or I'd be down. Because for some reason it's hard to calculate, especially on
um,
board and in your mind.
mm, yeah, I get it. So sometimes I mean now it's easier for us because we move the pieces and we know okay we lost two knights and we won, but in this position we have to calculate everything in your head. Oh, so then it's a good reminder to emphasize importance to like puzzle training because with puzzle training, I think we can get this kind of ability like strengthen, like calculate like material, something like that. Cool. So let's get to another one. So this is about opening C4, English opening. And before we talk about the next move, I will ask all of you. So if you play black and white play c4, what could be your plan? Let's think about like two or three moves when you see like c4. Jaden?
Well, I do not like playing e5 because it sort of makes a close position. So I go for a King's Indian defense with g5. I go for g6 personally.
Okay.
G6
Mm-hmm. And could you say something more about why don't you like
because it's
e5?
like very the English when I play against it's like very close and I do not like close positions. So I play a King's Indian attack, King's Indian defense against it.
Mm-hmm. And one more question, Jaden. What if white play d4? Are you playing like in India, for example?
No, I play c5.
You play c5, Benoni defense.
Yeah.
Okay, then why don't you play c5 against c4?
I don't know.
Maybe that could something like could be considered. Okay, but thank you, Jaden. Blake, what about you? C4. What's your choice?
I would go c6.
C6. Any reason?
I turn this into like a Queen's Gambit declined a snuff.
Like E4, like D4, D5.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Then if your opponent doesn't play D4, if it play E4, are you still considering D5?
Not really. I consider stuff like e6 and 97 g6.
You mean E7, 9, sorry, E6, 9, E7, and pawn G6 or
g6.
knight G6. Then
No, just pawn d6.
okay, 97 pawn g6 and then bishop g7 probably.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then how would you develop your line square bishop? Because there are so many pawns at line squares.
Usually I'd play d5,
And
and
you
if
can
we
play you
take it,
mm.
yeah,
So in the end you still like need to play d5. You want to
yeah.
still want to, okay, cool. Thank you very much. We will talk about like my suggestion against this one later, but let's collect more ideas. Jack, I think you met this C4 move, Jack, right? Maybe a couple of weeks or months ago, because I reviewed the game you played. You, your opponent played C4. Do you remember, Jack?
Was it online or was it on the board?
That I don't remember, but never mind. So what would be your choice?
Well, I would probably play something, maybe knight f6.
Mm-hmm. Then if white played D4,
Then maybe d5.
mm-hmm. Okay. So we still play, okay, pawn D5. Okay, cool. Then what about pawn take your pawn?
Um, Knight takes.
Knight takes, then what about E4?
Probably something like knight b6.
Knight to B6. Okay. Thank you very much. So yeah, well, we will talk about this variation later. So yeah, knight F6 against the C4. Thank you. Clara, last but not least, what you gonna play? Have you seen this C4 before in some tournament,
Yeah.
Clara? Mm-hmm. Then what's your choice?
It's either e5, knight c6, or knight f6.
Knight C6 and knight F6. So for example, knight C3, you play knight C6.
Yeah.
And if like white play G3 and you play knight F6, something like that.
Well, it's basically now like a reverse Sicilian.
Reverse Sicilian. Okay, you know the name. So then how would you develop this dark square bishop? So, or to be more specific, are you going to move the bishop to C5, E7, or G6, bishop G7?
I don't really know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
Depends.
Now that's a good answer. Depends on how your opponent develops. Yeah, that's the correct answer. Yeah. Let's talk about that more. So before we like talk about the moves you have mentioned, let me introduce the three common moves against C4. So first of all, the C4 move is not regarded as a first move in maybe 100 years ago in chess theory. So you can see chess theory is not always the same. It evolves. So I think that's from like Bobby Fischer when he played for the World Champion game. He played C4. And then, like many grandmasters, adopt this opening and realize it's actually a good one. So the thing with C4 is white uh, doesn't play E4, doesn't play D4. We know these two moves are the most common because it follows the theory. It controls the center, right? But the C4 pawn does not like move like straight to the center. It's close to the center, but it's like just next to the center pawn, center squares. And the reason white want to move this C pawn is to keep some flexibility. So white wants to have some like resilience, if I put this way, to like play the opening. So white wants to develop pieces according to how the game will develop. So from the other hand, from black's perspective, we need to also like be flexible to analyze each position as the game goes. Okay. So my first choice is play e5. And the reason is straightforward, control the center, right? And because white didn't play d4, so why don't we control the center with the e5? And we do have a name for that. It's called reverse Sicilian. Because if you see Sicilian, that is e4 c5, right? But here, white plays c4, and we play e5, and this is reverse, isn't it? And so, for example, white play, regardless knight c3 or knight f3, you can develop this knight. You can turn this into like close Sicilian. So what is close Sicilian? e4, c5, and white played knight c3 instead of knight f3, d4. White play the queenside knight, and the g3, bishop g2, knight e2, and castle later f4. So I can quickly show you like the moves. The reason I would choose like g6, knight e2, castling, and later white play f4. And the reason I call it like, oh, not I call it, I mean, people call it the close Sicilian because white didn't push the pawn to d4 to offer a pawn exchange, but instead white like gradually expand its space at the king side, and later d3, bishop e3, queen d2, and f5 to attack the king side. So that's how I would like play like Sicilian if I play as white, switch the board, and switch back again. But if that is reverse Sicilian, we can follow the same logic, c4 and e5. We can develop the same structure like as I did for white previously. So for example, knight c3, knight c6, and white play g3 because I mean, play knight c6 to control the d4. White cannot play d4, so white could play g3. And I would say g3 is definitely a decent move because the c4 pawn actually blocks the light square bishop. The light square bishop is not easy. It's not easy for the bishop to develop c4. And g3, and we can move the pawn to g6. So I think some of you mentioned knight f6, but instead I will keep the knight a little bit later to decide where I move the knight. Because if I move the pawn to g6 and bishop to g7, maybe later I can move the knight to e7. So for example, like d3, knight e7, knight f3, and the castle. And with my knight at e7, I can push the f pawn very easily, right? So I can f5, pawn to d6, bishop to e6, queen to d7, and f4. So this is the same structure you saw, but play from white's perspective. So when we play knight f6, like this one, white play bishop g2, and the question I asked Clara, also to all of you, is where shall we develop this dark square bishop? Where should we develop dark square bishop? Let's do like this. This is a question for you all, okay? We don't have much choice for the bishop, like c5, e7, or g6, bishop g7. I mean, bishop d6 is definitely not a good move because it's blocked by pawns and blocked the d7 pawn. And I don't think bishop b4 is a good trade either because there's no point we move the bishop to b4. We are, I mean, if we are attacking a pawn at e4, the knight is protecting that. It makes a little sense that we want to trade the bishop with the knight, but there's nothing we can do. We're not attacking something like e4, so I don't think bishop b4 makes much sense. So okay, what about bishop c5, bishop e7, or bishop g7? What do all of you, what do you think? Blake, that is the game from you. I think I remember you play something bishop c5, right? And what was
Yes.
your reasoning? Do you remember? Do you want to share?
I want bishop c5 to develop the bishop, but I thought bishop e7 was a bit passive. And g6, bishop g7, it's delving into the e5 pawn.
Yeah, g7, it could be like, yeah, like aim straight at our own pawn, like e5. So we move bishop to c5. Cool. Thank you. And Jada, your hand is up. How would you trade this bishop?
I think I'd go bishop to c5 because it also attacks the f2 pawn.
Attack the f2 pawn. Yeah, I agree. So we aim this pawn. Then I have a follow-up question for those who like try to move bishop to c5. Then how would you deal with white play e3 and later knight e2 and d4? Because once the pawn reach d4, your bishop will be kicked. And also you like your plan attacking at its f2 pawn. You see this pawn structure really strong. Our bishop, like right now, the bishop is aiming at this e3 pawn, right? But this pawn is so solid. You cannot do anything on e3. And also my question, how can we deal with knight e2 and d4? And I think we all agree that if the pawn reaches d4, our bishop will kick, and that feels so bad, right? How can we deal with that? My idea is super hard. It's super hard to deal with e3, knight e2, and d4. Because we cannot add any more pieces on the d4 square. We already have 3 pieces, but we cannot add more. And so that is the reason why I said the c4 opening or the English opening makes white so flexible, because white didn't play e4 immediately. Or can I put it another way? If here like white play e4 immediately, then I would say bishop c5 is my like best move, because I attack f2 and white cannot move the pawn back. White cannot move the pawn backward to protect the pawn, and white cannot have the e3 pawn supporting d pawn to d4. And this d4 square is a really great outpost. And our bishop and knight and pawn can control this square very, very well. Later, we can move knight to d4, for example. So, but because white has this flexibility, and the bishop to c5, yeah, or I mean, if I play as white, I saw this bishop to c5, I would definitely move the pawn to e3 rather than e4. The pawn to e3, and then e2, and then kicking the bishop. So from this regard, I think g6 and bishop g7. I agree with you that the e5 pawn is blocking our g7 bishop. But if we compare this plan with bishop c5, I would choose bishop to g7. And also the g7 bishop is a really good guard if we move the king to the king side. Yes, so this is my analysis on this choice of moving the bishop. Okay, this is the first idea, how we deal with this c4. And the second choice, knight f6. This is what you said, Jaden, or maybe play g6 first. I move knight f6 first and then g6. We turn the game into Indian game. So for example, if white play d4, if you play something like this, you turn it into Indian game, like bishop g7, e7, and d6. If you really like this opening, when you play it back, go for it. And the essence of this opening is instead of controlling the center with the pawn, black first built up a very solid structure at the king side to make the king safe, and then counterattack the center like e5 or c5. So this is also a very good opening. I like King's Indian. So if white plays c4, you can deal with that in the same way, knight f6, because you don't care how white move develops. You just develop the structure like this. But one thing to be aware of is once white play e4, we need to play d6. If we play castle straight away, the e5 move, kick our knight to this pawn structure is not good for us. They are so strong. So we can play d6 first. And e5, you can trade the pawns and trade the queens. And then you can play knight g4 to attack the e5 pawn. The e5 pawn is so weak. If f4, you can play f6. And actually, black has a quicker piece development than white. So we don't be afraid of this e5 after d6. And knight f6, castle, and then e5. So king's Indian's game. That could be my second choice against the c4. Finally, the third choice is c5. And the way how to deal with it is so simple, just to mimic or copy the moves your opponent made. So, for example, white play c3, you play knight c6. You want g3, you play g6. bishop G2, bishop G7, knight F3, knight F6, and D3, D6, castle, castle. This is boring, right? But at least it's safe. So yeah, this could be the third choice, and it's quite safe. You have this pawn structure. Your bishops are free and neither develop. But this is, boring, as I said. Okay, so those are the three ways I would deal with c4. Yeah. Any question? Any thought? Otherwise, let's keep going. So I have another one. This is French defense. And this is from Wiki. He played as white. But let's quickly recap the first couple moves. E4, E6, D4, D5, E5, C5, C3. This is advanced variation. Knight C6, knight F3, bishop B6, and A3 and C4. Black chose to close the center and also expand the space at the queen side, and knight to D2, bishop to D7. So looking at this position, I have a question. How would you further develop your white pieces? How would you develop your pieces further? Because right now the dark square bishop is blocked. The light square bishop cannot move to D3. Or if I think from a long-term perspective, are we going to attack the king side or queen side? Because once we have this question clearly be answered, we know we want to attack the king side, then we know how can we maneuver pieces towards the king side, and vice versa. Jaden, what do you think? What could be your plan if you play white?
My plan is G3 and bishop to G2 and then castles.
Mm-hmm.
To get the dark square bishop out, I think it'll be more harder, but maybe you could try after you've castled, slide your rook. Oh, right. You could slide your rook along to E1 and maybe get your knight back to F1 and then bishop to F5 and then that knight could be maybe after H3 be H.
Like G3, bishop to G2. I see your point. Let me play a couple of moves to illustrate that. For example, knight to G6, and you will castle, right? And bishop, rook E1, knight F1, and you can develop this dark square bishop. Something like that. Okay. Or maybe move the knight and F4 and move this knight to F3, for example. Okay. Then Jaden, are you considering attacking the king side or queen side? What could be your
Definitely the king side you got a bigger space advantage and I wouldn't go for queen side because black has a bigger space advantage.
Yeah, that's a good perspective, and that's a valid perspective. So if you have greater space control, it makes it easier to attack, and also it's harder for opponent to defend. And I assume if you want to attack the king side, we need to think about how can we open files and how can we create a pawn break, for example, pushing the f pawn like to f5, something like that. But we need to move the knight somewhere first, and then f4, f5, something like that. Okay. Uh, what do the rest of you think? Jack, what do you think? How would you develop your pieces? White to move.
Well, I would, yeah, probably do something similar, just maybe G3 or bishop E2 and then castle and then try get an attack on the king side.
Okay. And it sounds like we want to place our bishop at G2. Okay. Anything more, Jack?
Well, I guess you could try and play something like bishop e2, and then you can after you castles, and then you might be able to try maybe attack the f7. For
Mm,
example, maybe if you could maybe like knight g5, maybe
mhm,
bishop h5, queen f3, something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. We involve the queen, like bishop knight to g5. I use another color, bishop to h5 and queen to f3. Now we can attack f7. Okay, thank you very much. Clara, what do you think? How would you develop your pieces? Or how would you attack your opponent?
Uh,
Do you agree with like g3, bishop g2, or bishop e2?
yeah.
Which one? Are you going to move the bishop to g2, for example?
I do. The, for some reason, I don't know. Well, basically, in every position, I just when it comes to this thing, I don't know how to do it. I just for some like
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Like the thing is, if we think about piece development, if we look at the d2 knight, it doesn't have like squares to go. It's so awkward. And this knight block our dark square bishop, and our light square bishop. It seems we only have these two squares, e2 or g2, and this knight, blocked by these two pawns. Maybe knight g5, something we can go. But if we only move knight g5, it cannot do much stuff because all the rest pieces are so far from the g5 knight. So what can we do? We need to think about a way to keep the game going. So Blake, what about you? You are the expert in French defense when you play black. What do you think?
yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
don't usually play this as white. I would play g3,
Mm-hmm. And
g3, bishop h3
bishop h3. Mm-hmm.
to try and target the e6, and knight
e6
g5
and
to
knight g5. Mm-hmm.
and castles and like try and maneuver the knight. Like
Mm-hmm.
rook e1, knight f1, knight g3.
Aha. But wait, what do you say? Knight g3. You have a point at g3.
Oh,
How?
sorry.
Well, I think you bring up a very interesting idea because g3 and move the bishop to h3 instead of g2. Because once you push the f pawn and f5, your h3 bishop can support this pawn. And we do know if we want to attack the king side, the f pawn is really important if we want to open file something. So maybe g3 bishop h3 and move the knight to g5. To be honest, I don't think e6 is something we can do much about it because yeah, it's so like deep inside into the blacks like yeah, the sixth rank. We only have a knight and a bishop. We cannot do much on e6. But once we have the f pawn, push the f5, maybe you can attack the e6 with the bishop and the knight and the pawn. And also you have a rook at f1 after castling. Cool. But you know what, everyone? If you turn on the engine, the best move is b3. So it's interesting that none of us like mentioned this move. This move doesn't come into my mind when I look at the board, to be honest, because it feels unintuitive. Because we have this backward pawn, and from like theory we learned before, we were taught that if you want to attack your opponent, it's better that you have greater space. But to look at the queen side, white definitely has little or much less space than black. Then why is b3 the best move from the engine? This is interesting when we review the game. You can see some surprising move from the engine, and we need to understand why, and then how we can learn. Clara, your hand is up. What do you think?
And this isn't about the thing, but I actually just thought of B3, but I didn't say it because to me for those pawn lines to be separated, now it just feels a bit weird.
You mean separate? You mean the 2 pawns separate?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I don't feel this. I don't feel right of this b3, because if we like play a couple moves, if black take, I think black has to take that because the pawn is under attack by 3 pieces. Take that, and we take that with the knight. I think the good thing, first of all, is we finally make a space for the knight. The knight can move to b3. But on the other hand, the c3 pawn become a target at the semi-open file. And so this is how the game like developed. So black play rook c8, and white play bishop to d3. Can someone like realize something with this bishop d3? Or maybe that can explain why we play b3. Jaden, you have an emoji. What do you think?
I think maybe to attack h7.
Yeah. So finally, after removing the c4 pawn, we make a space, make a square for the light square bishop. So finally, we can develop this bishop to d3. So my point of view is the b3 pawn, the pawn moves to b3 does not necessarily mean white wants to attack the queen side, if you get the answer from the engine. But instead, actually, it makes white easier to attack the king side with the bishop placed at d3. Because if a bishop at d3, it can not only attack h7, but also attack f5. So it can also make our pawn to f5 like support it. So I think that's the reason white play b3, or engine thinks like b3 is the best move. So, but as I said, the c3 pawn is a target. So at the same time, we need to be sure that we can defend the c3 pawn. Otherwise, I think this like semi-open file favors black. But let's see how does the game like develop. So bishop to d3, knight to a5. That makes sense. This is a move. Black can make the rook open and trade the knight, and bishop to d2. I think the bishop d2, this move is very important, because with this bishop, if you really think about it, it's so hard for black to keep like getting something on the c3 square, because the white pawns at the dark square makes the dark square bishop so hard to be involved in this queen side. The bishop cannot attack from this angle, and the bishop cannot from this one either. And the knight, it's really hard. Imagine how can the knight to be placed to attack the c3? Maybe the a4 square. But how many moves requires? So knight to e7. Can anyone think about a move? Can anyone think about a plan to move the GA knight to a4 or b5 to attack c3?
I think there's knight e7,
Mm-hmm.
knight e7, knight e6, A6, 97, no b5.
Oh, we have to move the pawn to a6, 97, 95. How many moves? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it takes like 5 moves to move a single knight to b5. I'm not saying like it's not worth it, but you can see like it takes so much effort. And even though you move knight to b5, well, you can like just exchange like the knight with the bishop to make the c3 pawn like still safe. So so I think that's the fascinating side of like chess theory, because the d3 the b3 move, it doesn't feel right, at least in my eyes, because it helps our opponent make this semi-open file open. But in the end, if we realize the c3 pawn is very hard for your opponent to be attacking on, and also you can see the benefit of removing the c4 pawn. Actually, play b3 is the best move, and you can move your bishop to d3, which makes your king side attack much easier. You can move the knight to g5, attack h7, and as I said, after castle, like f4, f5, and then your queen can move to h5, and together with your bishop. So yeah, so b3 is the best move. So in this game, so actually black made a blunder. Can anyone tell there is a tactical opportunity? Why can win material?
C4.
C4, yes. Yeah, so quick and so accurate. Yeah, C4. That's a discover attack. But in this, we didn't do that. We trade the bishop. And I still have something to discuss with you. How about like this? Let's take 5-minute break. Let's take 5-minute break. And we will talk about the rest of the game later. Take some break, guys. Okay. If you feel you're ready, we can come back. So let's keep going. So why play a4? Because the a3 pawn is under attack. So we make the pawn safe, well protected. 97, queen b3. So in this game, it's interesting that the white tried to attack at the queen side, because we move the pieces, attack this b7, which could make sense. But to be honest, I think black can defend the queen side very easily. And that's my question. So white attacking b7, and how would you defend b7 if you play as black? And to be more specific, I don't think black has many choice. One is b6, another is rook c7 or rook b8. And which one is the best one? Let's start from you, Blake. how would you defend the b7 pawn? This is on the attack.
I would play rook c7.
Reason?
And after g6, bishop g7, and cut others, you can like double the rooks.
You can you can keep the rook at the c file.
Yeah.
Yeah, c7. Okay, and also you move the rook like a little like downward, then the other rook can move to c. Okay. Interesting. Very good idea. Clara, what do you think?
Yes.
Did you say agree or what do you say? How would you defend the b7 pawn?
So I think we just play b6.
Any reason?
That's the first thing I thought of, and don't wait.
Well, so I guess when you pawn at play at b6, you can like have a pawn protecting that instead of queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the queen can actually attack something.
Yeah, that's also one of the theory we learned. So you know what, guys? So the interesting thing is when you get exposed to many chess theories, you can find that sometimes if you have a specific position, some theories conflict with each other. So like when you play b6, I think me and Clara said you can have a pawn protecting the b6, and then you can set the a6 queen free. Otherwise, you have to protect the pawn with either or both of a queen and a rook, which like make these two pieces like kind of like burdened, right? The b6, and then we can set the pawn free. Jack, what do you think? Which one do you prefer to protect the b7 to make the pawn safe?
Well, I think that probably rook c1 or rook b8 are a little bit passive because you have to keep the pieces that otherwise you'll lose a pawn. So I'll probably say b6.
Okay. b6. Cool. Thank you. And also for your thank you for your reasoning as well. Jaden, what about you?
I think it should be b6 because although your queen is also like stopping them from castling kingside.
Sorry, what do you mean? I don't get it. Can you elaborate?
So personally, the queen is actually stopping the white side from castling. So I would not like. So I would like maybe play b6 so I can keep the threat and make no delay maybe.
But if you move the rook, your queen is still at like a6.
Yeah, but he could. Yeah, but couldn't he just play queen to b5 check? To be honest, in my opinion, you could queen b5.
Yeah, queen b5. Yeah,
Block.
controlling back. Yeah, block this diagonal. But on the other hand, if you play b6, I can still play queen b5.
That's even worse. That's the queen's just right, fine. At least you can trade it off.
And also, I think black has to take the queen, right? Because the queen is hanging, and that's the check. And if queen takes the queen, what do you think? What could be? What is the best piece to take the queen, the pawn or the rook? Jaden, what do you think? If black take the queen, are you going to? If you play white,
Well, if we take with the pawn, you like they might have a chance to get a passed pawn in the endgame that might be good for them. But if you take with the rook, I think I'd take with the rook, to be honest. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you get a semi-open file.
Mm-hmm. If you take the pawn, you still have a semi-open file, but it's on the A file. The question is, which semi-open file favors white the best? Do you prefer a semi-open file here, or do you prefer a semi-open file at and also considering the pawn structure? Mhm. This is a question for you all. But 1 second. But let's get back to this position. Okay, let's solve the question one by one. So okay, I heard like rook c7, b6, and then rook ba. And first of all, rook ba is not as good as rook c7 because both of them move, rook protecting the pawn, but the rook c7 is better because yeah, the rook can still stay at the c file. You're right. But you know what? The best move, if you turn on the engine, is rook c7 rather than b6. If we simply look at the safety of the pawn, pawn b6 is definitely better than using a rook to protect the pawn because we have this pawn protecting the pawn. It just saves a lot of effort. But the problem with b6 is because of queen b5. And as we said, black has to take the queen. And you know what? The best choice to take the queen is take that with the pawn. And the reason is, first of all, if you look at the pawn structure, the b5 pawn can control these two pawns. So this single pawn controlling these two pawns. And this a file is much easier to be like attacked on if you compare with the b6. Because the b6 is forward pawn. It's well protected by the a7. And if you attack this backward pawn, the a7 isn't that much easier because yeah, there's no any other pawn protecting that. And maybe we can play like a5 to kind of to like break this pawn structure. But if you look at knight to c6, it's really hard to push the a5. And the knight can move to the a5 afterwards, and then the knight can stay at c4. If the black knight staying at c4, first of all, it's this like this is outpost. Like it's really hard for us to kick knight away, and also the knight can guarding a5. It makes us super hard to push the pawn to a5. So if you look at the pawn structure, taking out the a pawn is the correct move. And now we solve the problem of the b pawn, but the a pawn is another problem. It's really hard. It's really passive to protect the pawn. So considering this, if we move to c7, now if white play queen b5, what can we do? A question to you all. If we play rook c7 and queen b5, what is the best move for black? Thinking about in some previous lessons, we talked about piece trading. Jaden.
Could we maybe do queen to c6?
Queen to c6. You are perfect right. Queen to c6 is the only move to trade the queens. Not the only move, the best move to trade the queens for black. Because the any other move, for example, if you take that with a queen, this is what we saw earlier. Even though the a7 is not backward, it's still very hard for black to protect the pawn. Let's think about the pawn rook to a1. You cannot push the a pawn if the rook at a1, and maybe black still needs to play like a b6. And this like backwards pawn structure is so bad. And let's look at the b5 pawn. This pawn looks isolated, but if you take a very close look, it's really hard for black to attack this pawn, to be honest. First, it is on the light square. Black doesn't have light square bishop. And this knight, it's super hard for the knight to, for example, d6 controlled by this pawn. And maybe the knight has to move to c7, and then the knight can attack the pawn. But it's really hard for the knight to maneuver to c7. and there is no open file, so which means the rook cannot attack the pawn, and the c5 square is controlled by d4 pawn. So this pawn is quite safe. This pawn can control these two pawns really well. So trading the queen immediately doesn't favor black, it favors white. And if we move the knight to c6, and white can probably take the queen, and this double pawn is so bad. And if rook to block, we can take the pawn immediately. So queen c6, that's the best move. And if you take the queen, and black can take it with the knight. So even though this pawn is still at the semi-open file, but it's easily to be protected. You can play knight a5, knight c4, yeah. So this is how we like deal with this trading. So let's keep going. Okay, cool. Here black play f5 and white castle. This is a very important question. When you turn on the engine or when you review the game, the engine actually think castling is not the best choice to place the king. The engine suggested move the king to e2. Does anyone know why?
Because your king's more active?
You're right. But isn't the king like unsafe on e2? My follow-up question. Is the king on e2 safe if you compare with castle? Clara?
I think it's safer because like the knight can't really reach, or the rooks can't really reach the king.
Yes.
And when you castle, they can just push the pawns and attack your king easier. And if you move there, like all the pawns, they aren't open, so your king is still safe.
Yes, you're right. So so I think when we like get like initial when we like get to learn like chess theory, I think one of the maybe not the first, but maybe one of the earliest like principle you have learned is like castle as early as possible, right? If you reflect the opening principles, control the center, develop pieces, and make the king safe, which sometimes equal as like castle. But we have to be like mindful that the reason we want to castle is we want to make the king safe. But that does not necessarily mean castling is always the best choice. So look at this position. First of all, it's I think in general it's a closed position. The only like semi-open file are like A file and C file, which are far away from the king. The center are pretty closed. So make the king stay at the center is actually quite safe. And another reason is this is after you trade the queen, basically this is endgame, even though we still have a bunch of like pieces, but because we don't have the queens. So king to e2, so you basically can activate your king to support. The king can be a very good, strong supporter in the endgame. You can use that very well. So if we castle, this move like just simply make the king like two extra moves to be like going out. So if you move the king to the queen side, it takes like two more moves because you move the king to the g1. And if you move the king at the center, you can choose. You can choose. You can look at how the game like develop. You can choose to move it to the queen side or the king side. Okay, so your king is quite flexible when it comes to the position. So king e2 is the best move, best placement for the king instead of castle. This is one thing. And h6, rook a1, this is good. Attacking this like pawn. And rook c7, and rook a4, we want to double the rooks. And if you consider this four square, I think rook a4 is a very good one because it can also like protect the c4. Maybe potentially someday you can push the pawn. We don't know. Okay, so g5 and rook to a1, knight to c8, and knight to e1. The knight at f3 doesn't do anything, so it's better that we can maneuver that. And black play g4 because black cannot do anything on the queen side. So now black like expand space on the king side. It's quite funny that black has much more space than us at the queen side, and black want to do something at the king side. So that then I will give you my last question of this game. What can we do? So, or let me break down this question into smaller ones. So first question, which side is better, white or black? This is my first question if you ask me to analyze the position. Jaden.
I think in space terms, I think black is better on the king side and probably white on the queen side. Material, it's pretty equal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much. Jack, what do you think? Black or white? Which side is better?
Well, I think it's pretty similar because there's not a big difference like a double pawn or pawn structure, and then the materials even, there's no difference. So it's hard to say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but if I ask you to like, I mean, it's similar, right? But is that 50-50 when you say it's similar? Or I mean, if one side has slightly better, that still counts. So which one is better? Do you see my point? Yeah.
Maybe white is better by a little bit.
Uh-huh. Then what is the little bit part? I want to hear this one. So why do you think white is a little bit better?
Because they have a pretty active position and they have double rooks on the A file. And then black, their rook and knight, they can't really move defending the A7 pawn. And then the bishop isn't really doing lots when white actually can maybe, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you summarized it very well. Before I say something, Jaden, you want to add something?
I think black is better.
Mm-hmm. Any reason?
Because maybe rook to g7, rook to g7, and then rook on h to g8, bishop to e7, and then maybe bishop to h4.
Mm-hmm. So you want to attack the king side?
Yeah. And you could like try to do a pawn storm down.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Like push h pawn or f pawn, and okay, open the king side. Mm-hmm. But is there anything white can do on the queen side? Because we talked about some potential move, black can attack our kings, but if white is quicker than us, if white can attack the queen side, maybe, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. But thank you for input, Jaden. Let's hear more from the rest of you. Like Blake, what do you think? Which side is better, and the reason?
I think white is better because black's position is more passive.
Mm-hmm. When you say passive, do you mean like this pawn, these two pieces protecting
Yeah.
the pawn? Mm-hmm. But isn't the bishop protecting c3? Why don't you think the bishop is passive?
Well, the bishop is a bit passive, but the bishop can still aim down the c1 to h6 diagonal.
You can still being like active at this diagonal. Okay, yeah, that's a very fair point. So you think white is better?
Yeah.
Thank you. Clara, what do you think?
I think that white is better.
Any reason?
It's because like we have one pawn island and they have two pawn islands, and then like a7 is pretty weak. So then the knight can't really develop, or you'll just take it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So thank you very much. I think all of you mentioned like our attacking on a7. First of all, let's turn on the evaluation bar. Let's see which side is better. Okay, white is slightly better. Not side, it's quite significant. 1.2 plus. So yeah, white is better. And I agree with you that the main reason is this a7 pawn. But apart from the a7 pawn, is there any other weakness that the white can attack on? Jaden.
Well, I don't maybe e6, but I don't count e6 as a weakness because white can't really attack it yet.
E6, but first of all, it's a backward pawn.
It could be one of the end game.
Then yeah, I agree with you. Maybe the only piece can attack e6 is e1 knight moving to f4, because after pawn to g4, we do have a chance to move knight to f4, and it's quite a good square, and we can sort of like attacking the e6. This is another like weak like backward pawn. Okay, the reason I'm asking apart from the a7 pawn, is there any other weakness? Because we want to set up a specific plan to like convert our this like advantage to win it, because we all know from the engine or from our analysis white is better, but the question is how can we convert this to win it. So now we know, okay, a7 is a weakness, e6 could potentially be another one. Then how can we attack these two pawns? Because right now, even though we have two active rooks, black has a knight protecting a7. How can we add another piece, attack a7? Can we add the bishop, attack a7? Can we add the knight, attack b7, a7? Can anyone set up a plan to add maybe one of the piece?
Knight d3. Knight b4, knight c6.
If we imagine, if we have a knight at c6, then our knight can be involved. And from b4, yeah, that's the only like path, right? So, but a follow-up question, Blake, once your knight move b4, I could probably trade your knight with my bishop.
Yeah, that's what I'm worrying about right now.
Yeah. And after realizing this, like this point, so maybe we need to think about another like target, because the single a7 target is not enough for us to like convert this to winning. How can we do? Cool. So let's do like this. So if you like play a game like this, if you have this position and you want to set up a plan, when you review the game, I would recommend use the smartest bot to help you. So for example, I would turn the position like this one. And I think some of you already learned that. You can practice this with the computer and let the bot, the smartest bot, to play as you. And you can play against it and then summarize what has this smartest computer done and into some like conclusion. So I would suggest for the rest of the lesson, we only have like maybe like 10 minutes, but we can play a couple of moves with this bot together, okay? So this one is super smart, like smarter than what we played last time. This one has a rating 3000. I don't think Magnus Carlsen can beat it, to be honest. So we can learn from it, okay? So the rook moved to c1 Interesting. We talked about any weakness, but the rook moved to c1. And let's do like this. I will ask like one of you, and I mean all of you, like one by one, to play as black. Try your best. Okay? Let's play maybe 2 rounds and summarize the idea. Rook to c1. Let's start from Clara. What are you going to do after white play rook to c1?
H5.
H5? But one question before we move the piece. What do you think? What was the purpose of rook c1, Clara? Since you are the one moving the.
Well, maybe it's to push the pawn, or yeah, I think it's to push the pawn.
Push the pawn. Okay. So instead of focusing on the A file, white, or at least the both switch the focus to the C pawn, trying to open the C file. Okay, so let's play H5 and let's see how it goes. White plays C4. Thank you, Clara. And Jack, do you want to be the next one? What are you going to do? I think white is going to opening the C file.
Yeah.
And also like challenge our like pawn structure at the center. But yeah, how can we deal with that?
I think I might play knight e7, but I'm not exactly sure.
97.
If they play c5, then we're in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
We kind of have to take.
And 97 also, I mean, besides pawn c5, I'm not sure, but what about take our pawn instead?
If they take our pawn, I guess you either take it with the knight or you take the rook on c1.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. Cool. So, are you going to play 97? We can try that on the board.
I mean, I don't think it's the best move.
No, it's a super difficult decision to make because, yeah, once your opponent wants to open the file, we have to be 200% cautious.
Yeah. If only there was a move knight b6.
I mean, if you can make the move to b6, yeah, that's perfect. But unfortunately, we don't have the chance. Okay, then yeah, should we try that at least? I mean,
you could take the pawn with your
mhm.
pawn.
So yeah, should we try this one?
I think I may have found. What if you take the pawn as a rook,
Mm-hmm.
and then if rook takes, pawn takes, and rook takes, I think you can. It might not be that bad.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
I'm gonna.
also,
Mhm.
the b5 pawn might be a weakness, but if we do that, then the d pawn might be a little bit dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that might be the best move I can think of so far.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's try that with the rook. I think that looks as the best thing we can do. Because regardless we take it with the pawn, I think we still need to trade the rook in some way. Otherwise, we'll lose control of the c5. Let's try that. Rook takes, and I can make this one. This is simple. Take the rook. Rook take. Okay, I leave it to you, Jaden. Rook to c4. What you gonna do?
I'm scared the knight's under attack and I can't go to d6. If I go to e7, I'm a bit worried of maybe rook coming down to c7, so I might protect my knight with my king.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I think maybe king d7 or king d6. What about king d8 or king d7? But I like king to d7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that as well. Because you can defend the e6. Now rook to c6. Blake, how would you deal with the rook to c6?
I think I would go something like h4.
h4. Push the pawn. Let's
Yeah.
try that. Thank you, Blake. Knight to d3. What is the purpose of this move? Can anyone take a guess? Make a wild guess. Well, Jaden.
Um, Maybe to support the e5 pawn or come around to f4 and then into g6. Or help attack e6.
Yes. So now, you see, everyone, now we have a chance to attack e6. We talked about e6, right? But back in the time, we don't have the c5 open. We can only involve the knight, attack e6. But now, with the rook, with the open c5, and always this b5 pawn. So what I realized a7 pawn is really hard to attack. Because I think some of you mentioned if you move knight to b4, the knight will be traded. So white changed the mind to open the c file and attack e6. Okay, because we are kind of tied with the time, let me play a couple moves to see if we can like protect e6 because we set like knight f4, right? So I would like to
Can we
move
play
the
knight
bishop.
a6?
Sorry,
Can we play a6?
a6. Let's try that. Let's try that. Ooh, d5. Crazy. What can we do, everyone? d5. So this is another thing I like to highlight because once the d5 pawn moves with the c pawn challenge, there's always a way white can. Let's take the pawn. Let's see what happened. e6. Ooh, I have to protect knight, so I have to move king to d8, knight to e5. The knight moved to the center, threatening knight to f7. I need to move my rook to h7 because I have to protect the knight. I cannot really move the king. g5. So all the white pieces attacking. Bishop e7. Am I still safe? Oh, I will be checkmate with this couple of moves. Okay, a nice try with I think even though we don't play a6 like bishop to h5, I tried bishop to h6 because we talked about white would play knight f6. Let's see. Oh, trade the bishop. Knight f4. Still attacking over e6. What can we do? Is that the Zugzwang? I don't know. Jaden,
Your rook is actually protecting the e6 pawn, so I just play rook to e7.
you
Knight to
mean
e7, I
knight
mean.
e7? Yeah, we cannot move the king, so maybe the knight is only we cannot move the rook. You're right. We have to protect e6. So that's why I say it looks like a Zugzwang. Knight e7, king to d6. Ooh, we lose the e6. Ooh, and the knight takes that. It's so scary because I think we'll lose the knight. King down. Yeah, I have to move here. And we'll lose the knight. You see? So a very brief summary with what white has done or with what the bot has done is actually instead of attacking the a7 weakness, which we are all aware of, white find this e6 pawn and also this structure. So first before like opening another open file involving the rook to c6, this critical square, attacking e6, and then moving the knight, combine, attacking e6, and also with the pawn break at d4 to destroy our defense. So yeah, so I think if you like have this position when you like feel you're better than your opponent, sometimes it's very important to find the target. And if you already have a weakness of your opponent, but you cannot really 100% like tackle it, maybe find another path could like yeah strengthen our position like this one. Okay, time is up, and thank you everyone for participation. Have a nice evening. Thank you everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.